just read was not because we've been going through Proverbs, but it is because that Proverbs really describes the tone and attitude of how this question answer has been going. You all have pretty much demonstrated that you want to be wise, and through your wisdom you're asking questions. And my plan was every last Sunday of the month I'm going to do the question and answer. That was the plan. I have to change that plan now, which is for good reason, because I have a lot of questions, which is really good. And I appreciate all the questions that have been put in there. I have 18 questions, but some questions have more than one question embedded in the question, so I have more than that. And I saw in the box that there are more questions, so I don't really know how much I have. Some of them do not require just a quick answer, yes or no, like the one for this evening. And because of that, at least for now, I'm going to just dedicate each night to a question and answer night. Let me backtrack. Not every night, every Sunday evening, every Sunday night, every Sunday class or worship, we will look at a question. And I think that will help because some of you have been waiting a whole entire month for yours to be answered, and I don't want you to wait any much longer. So for this one, this question and answer, I'm going to read it first, and then we will dive into the word. This one says, 2 John 9:3-11. If you want to go ahead and turn there, that's where we're going to be. 2 John 9:3-11. And the verse is quoted, and we'll look at that verse in just a moment, but they wrote out the verse. Well, you know what? Let's just go to it, because the questions deal with what that says. So John is writing, and he says in 2 John, there's only one chapter, so verse 9, whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive him into your house, nor greet him. For he who greets him shares in his evil deeds. So, that's the passage. There are two parts. First thing comes to mind is Jehovah's Witness. Taking the verses as literal, doctrine, house, invite in, all that. Some will say you cannot do it, for they obviously do not bring sound doctrine. Second thing comes to mind is do not receive them into your house, as being described as your heart and mind. So another interpretation that some people have. Not a physical house and walls. God's sound doctrine is the only thing our hearts, minds should hold. My question is, can you help clarify the deepness of these verses to help those who are early in their walk understand, plus help those who are farther in their walk explain it clearly? And then a little side note on the bottom, thought this would be a great talk for us learning to Bible study with people. So as Chance is doing that in the morning class, this is very timely, very appropriate. So we consider the brevity of 2 John. We look at this and we might think, well, we could probably cover this really quick in just one sermon. Actually, in 2021, we were going through the letters of John, and when we hit 2 John, I actually had 2 sermons on that, because there is a lot there in this letter. So one might be tempted to think, well, the shortest letter of the Bible, the New Testament, is just going to not be as deep and as much as the others, but that is a misconception. We begin with the context of this letter. The letter is written to the elect lady and her children, as verse 1 says. So John, being the elder, writing to the elect lady. First question that comes up, who is the elect lady? Because that can alter the interpretation, or if we go too far, but we have to consider possibilities that still line up with the Bible. The letter is written to the elect lady. Some have said that this is a figure of speech that represents the whole congregation or church that he's writing to. But there's also indication that there is a literal lady. She would be a sister in this case, and she has literal children. This is because, if we were to go that route, this is because the New Testament passages talk about the leadership roles and in the church, and really there is no such position in the church as an elect lady or a lady that has an authoritative role of that manner. And so, plausibly talking about, a sister, but it is possible still to be talking about the whole church. And so, those are the only two. We cannot go farther than that. Verse 13 says, the children of your elect sister greet you. And so here it's talking about another lady, with other children, could be another congregation, and just that figure of speech talking about another congregation somewhere else, and that's near to them. Or maybe it's just another actual sister that's close by. It could be that this mother that he's talking to opens up her home for the worship service to happen, because that is how they did it back then. Somebody had to open up their home for the worship services. Verse 7, for many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and antichrist, or against Christ. Look to yourselves that we do not lose those things we work for, but that we may receive a full reward. There was an issue back in those days that was called Gnosticism. Huge word. But the Gnostics were a specific religious mindset that people would hold, not really tied to really a certain religion, so to speak, but certain ideas that people could adopt, and it was called Gnosticism. And in Gnosticism, their thinking was, there's no way that Jesus could have came in the flesh, because the flesh is sinful. How could Jesus take on a body when the flesh is literally inherently sinful, full of sin? But the Bible talks about how Jesus did have a literal body. And how is that reconciled? Well, basically, the sin is not inherently sinful. That's not how it works. And John and the apostles, they had to deal with things like that. Especially John, in really all of his letters. You look at how he words things, and it's almost as if he's constantly having to deal with this issue. There's false teachers out there, or in that time, that were saying Jesus did not come in the flesh. But then they would go further, and they would say, well, the flesh is sinful, and then the common question would be, well, what about us? We have a flesh, so are we without hope? Well, then their reply would be, well, we're okay because inside our soul is pure no matter what we do on the outside, which then contradicts what they say about Jesus. But either way, it was all error, but this is what they had to deal with. This is what they were aware of. It wasn't something entirely new to them. They knew people were out there saying this, and John says, if someone comes to you and they have this, just know this, and they don't abide in the doctrine or the teaching of Christ. They are against Christ, verse 7. And so whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ, yes, we can look at that, and generally speaking, there's all sorts of ways we can be against Christ. The specific way was really what was happening there. Those Gnostics were saying things like that. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. So verse 10 comes around and says, you don't allow those men to be received in your house. In ancient times, the traveling preachers, and they traveled a lot. Traveling preachers were dependent on brethren to house them. They didn't have the opportunity to always go to an inn, although they did have that back then. But it's not like our time where, there's a Holiday Inn, and then there's a Ramada Inn, there's Motel 6, and there's all these sorts of places that they can go. Their best bet was they stay at someone's house. If this person comes to, if it's a literal lady, if it comes to her house, she cannot help him in his work. She cannot house him so that he could do the work of the traveling preacher. If this is a congregation, if it's a figure of speech representing the church, it works the same way. We're not going to provide for that teacher a place so that he can do his work. This does not mean that Christians should never help those who are teaching falsely in any way. If that were true, we would not be able to help anybody. You think about it. All people outside of the Lord's body believe and teach error in some way, in some area. Whether they teach the children or their spouses or friends or whatever, they're not abiding in the doctrine of Christ. And so, if we are to believe that 2 John 10 and 11 forbids hospitality to false teachers, then we would have to be consistent and really help no one outside the church. But that would contradict Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 and 10. We are to do good to all, especially the household of faith. Emphasis on the church, yes, but that doesn't exclude everybody else. We are to do good. 2 John 9 is built so that the Christians would not help the false teachers in their work. Don't even give them the impression that that's what you're doing. The greeting there, for he who greets him, that is the word charis, which means grace or rejoice. It has more meaning than just how we say hello. We say hello, we can say even to someone we don't like, hello, or something like that. But charis it's like a term of endearment. This is why Paul would tell them, charis to you. There's something there that indicates we're on the same page in some way. We're the same body. Don't greet them like that. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to say, I can't tell you even hello. That's not what he's saying here. If you say something in a way where you're indicating to them that you agree with what they're doing, we're on the same page, that's what he's forbidding. And so I'm not going to, when someone from a denomination knocks on my door, I'm not going to say, hello, brother. I'm not going to say that because we're not on the same page. And that wouldn't be mean, but that would be my loving way to say, hey, I'm setting the stage for me to help you out of this error. And so if a false teacher had a house burned down, we're not going to say, oh, sorry, you're a false teacher. We just can't help you. We're not going to do that. We're going to show our hospitality, but that would be different than saying, well, I'm doing this because I'm helping you in your work. That would be different. Helping that person would not show, well, we're doing this because you teach this. Now, if we say that, then it makes it different. But we have to think about that. As far as housing teachers, we're not totally far removed from this. What happens when we have gospel meeting speaker? What do? Where do you need to stay? We don't say, well, we're not in ancient times anymore. We don't really do that. No, we house them. We provide a motel, hotel, or one of us even houses the person. But consider this scenario. We invite a preacher to come speak for us. On the first day of the gospel meeting, he delivers a sound, solid gospel sermon. I mean, it's on point, everything. Second night, he comes up and he says, baptism is not essential for salvation. What are we going to do? Well, we'll go ahead and hear him out the rest of the time, and we'll keep providing his housing. No, we're not going to do that. Now, we're not going to be mean about it, but it's our way of saying we cannot help you anymore with this work. You're going to have to leave. Or recant what you said, clarify or change it, ask for forgiveness or something. We can't just let that go on, okay? So we have to keep that in mind. According to 2 John 10:11, we'd be sharing in his sins. And so it's that important. False teachers, when they teach a false message, and if we were just to, turn our face away from it and just let it happen and say, well, the members know better, they can sift through all that, we would do a disservice to the members and visitors. False teaching lands people in condemnation. It's that important. So if we were to say, I'm sorry, we can't support you, we can't have you teach, it would be out of our love for everyone else not to hear such nonsense. We don't want people to hear false teaching because that hurts the soul. Now, what if we already know the person is a false teacher? Would we even invite him to come? We would not. We would not house him. We would not greet him in such a way where we would say, oh, you teach that, we teach this, it's all okay, we're all going to the same place. We're not going to do that. That would violate 2 John verses 10 through 11. Consider another scenario. A random man comes to the building asking for a place to sleep. He just lost his apartment due to financial troubles, for whatever reason it was. But before we decide to help him, we give him a religious questionnaire and say, if you fail this, we're not helping you. So we don't do that. We're not going to do that because almost everybody who comes to us has some kind of error in their mind. We would basically say, I'm sorry, we can't help. But that violates Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 and 10. We have to do good to all, especially the household of faith, the Christians, but we do it to all nonetheless. And so, more than likely, people are not going to abide in the doctrine of Christ, but we're still going to show our love. But what it comes down to is this. Why are we helping? That's the question you need to ask. Are we helping because we care for a person and we just want to show the love of Christ? Or are we helping so that we can support their work in the false teaching? That's the question we'd be asking. And if it's a gray area, we've got to really make it known to the person why we're doing it. Okay. What was brought up here comes to mind as Jehovah's Witness. Okay, so this is brought up, and I'm pretty sure this is brought up because most of the time, those are the ones who are knocking on your door. Now, I have had other religious groups knock on my door, and it's few and far between, but the ones who really do it is this. And door knocking is a method of getting the gospel out. We do it, and there's always room to do it more. Jehovah's Witnesses, when they do it, they bring a certain doctrine, and it is not according to the Bible. We say this with all the love in the world. We're not trying to make fun of them or say something mean, but they don't adhere to the word. And so when they come to your door, the question would be, should I receive them into my house? Should I even say hello? Well, saying hello, you can, but just don't make it seem like we're all family and brothers and sisters around here. And you can invite them into your house to have a study, but there are some things that you really do need to know, and this is not to say this is why you don't do it, but there are some things you have to know before you allow them into your house, okay? Because knowledge helps. We can let the Jehovah's Witness, come into our house and have a Bible study, but just to let you know, they don't like the term Bible study. If you say, and I've dealt with this, if you say, let's have a Bible study, they will say, I will not have a Bible study with you. And I said, well, we've been talking for a little bit here. We've basically been doing a Bible study. Well, what would you like me to call it? And I remember one of them said, we'll call it a Bible discussion. I was like, fine, we'll call it a Bible discussion. If you say a Bible study, that's it, it's done for them. Because their thing is, they will lead. They will do the lead part. They will initiate the Bible study. They are the ones who do that. And so when you bring them in, what they're going to do is they want to lead the study. And you have to be aware that you may not be able to talk as much as you want. They'll let you talk, but you gotta keep that in mind. You gotta find ways to really bring in something you need to say. But when they're in there, I'm not gonna pay them for their services. Okay, that would violate this. I'm gonna be nice to them. I'm gonna reveal their error. And if you reveal it long enough, they won't last there too much in your house. Okay, they're going to want to go away. Before you invite them in, it also benefits us to understand that they have been heavily trained. Now, we are being trained, right? There's nothing wrong with that. In itself, being trained to evangelize and have Bible studies, that's a good thing. We're doing it in the Bible class. But just keep that in mind, that you're not dealing with someone who's just been thrown out there and, they're doing their best. They don't really know what to do. You're dealing with someone who has been really trained and they know exactly where we stand. Once you say, I'm a member of the Church of Christ, they already have in their minds a list of things that we stand for. Okay? And so just keep that in mind. It's not going to be new to them. We must know that, we're talking to trained people, and if you're willing to do that, fine. Just know that it's going to be a good exercise for you. And they are trained to talk about the same subjects. And here's another thing to keep in mind. You can invite them in, and you can have a Bible discussion or study or whatever they want to call it. You want to talk about the Bible. They will always want to talk about the same two things. And if you're not ready to talk about those two things, you may not be ready to have a discussion with them. Or you can try it out and see how it goes and just learn from your mistakes. But the first one that they're always going to go to is John chapter 1. John chapter 1, the first verses that talk about how in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. They're the Word. They believe it's Jesus, but they insert a word that's not there, and they say is a God. And because they do that, they're saying that Jesus is a created being. God the Father created Jesus, and he is not God, but he's a lesser God. He's like a little g God. And they'll put little g in there. They have their own translation. And so you got to remember, they use their own translation that they have made, and they put Jesus is a God, a little God, less God, and created. You have to be ready to talk about that. And there's an answer for that. Once you get that under your belt, that's probably going to be the first discussion. The second one is premillennialism. You don't know what that word is? You're going to have to know it when you talk to them. They're going to want to talk about the last days. They're going to talk about how Jesus is going to come down and reign for 1,000 years, and he's going to be in Jerusalem, and then there's going to be this renovated earth. The earth is going to change, and there's going to be this huge war and all the rapture and all that talk. They're going to want to talk about that. And they're going to talk about that because they know the Church of Christ and where they stand in John chapter 1, and they know where we stand when it comes to premillennialism. Now, and I'm not saying that to discourage you from talking to them, but maybe this will motivate you to really dive into those subjects, because we got to know them anyway. Well, we got to know that Jesus is not a little g God. He's God. And he's not created by the Father. He was there in the beginning. We have passages that talk about this. John 17, that we talked about that this morning, where he's talking to God the Father, and he says, before the foundation of the world, you loved me. So he was there, and also John chapter 1 says, in the next verses, that all things that were created through him. all things that were created through him, which means he was not created. It would be like he was created through himself. You know, it doesn't make sense. But there's other passages that you can take them to. Premillennialism, you can take them to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 13 through 18. 1 Corinthians 15. There's John chapter 5, verse 28 and 29. There's a host of verses that you can be ready. And once you get those subjects, you'll be more apt and ready to talk to them. Maybe the third thing that they might throw in is if you have a cross on your wall, they're going to want to talk about that because they'll say that that's idolatry, and then you'll have to explain how we're not worshiping it, we're not praying to it, it's just a symbol that reminds us of Jesus on the cross, and that's it. Though there may be people who actually pray to the cross, that is not what we do. And so that might be the third thing you'll have to talk about. Also consider they work in pairs. If you're by yourself, you will have to talk to two people, which if you're okay with that, fine. If they get the hint that you are trying to teach them anything, they will leave. But I'm not telling you this to make you nervous and think, well, it's just a lost cause for us to even try. Because I'm going to give you something else for you to think about when it comes to this in the Jehovah's Witness. It is possible for a Jehovah's Witness to come to the truth. First, because there's power in the gospel, right? And who knows if there's one who's struggling in that religion. And I've heard of different ones, but I've actually went through one. We had no problem me calling it a Bible study with this particular one, because this is how it happened. There was a time that we had a yard sale, and this one man comes, young man, he was around my age, so he's a young man, and he wanted to talk about what I was selling. And then he wanted to talk about religion. Oh, yeah, okay. Because I lived right next to the church building. This is when I was living somewhere else. We shared the same parking lot. And so we got to talk about religion. Well, lo and behold, he wants to talk about John chapter 1, because that's where they always go to. You gotta be ready for that. Well, I was ready, and I talked to him about it, and he was, wow, I never knew that. Hey, we agreed to have a Bible study. So I brought him into my house. We had Bible studies. We had multiple. It was going great. He was like, oh, I didn't know that. Wow, I didn't know that. And he's like, he's getting into it. Until the Jehovah's Witness that he works with found out what he was doing, and they didn't like it. And so what happened was, he was not allowed to go anymore unless he took one of the elders. And so he took his superior, and that's when it went downhill, because he told that other person, you are not to talk anymore, it's just me and him. And so now my Bible studies shifted to the other person. Of course, he wants to talk about John chapter 1, he wants to talk about premillennial things. It's fine. Also, you want to talk about, is it good to know any Greek words? It is. Once you show them that you know one Greek word, that's when they get kind of nervous, because they try to use the Greek. And so would there be any benefit to learning the ancient language that the Bible was originally written in? It is, because some will know, hey, they know their stuff. And that's where you get to talk to them. Because John chapter 1, there is no Greek word for the letter A. You bring that up to them. First thing. When they say, well, it says Jesus is a God, and then you can kindly and politely say, well, just to let you know, there is no Greek word for the letter A. And so you would have to really put it there only based on the context, and the context does not demand that a letter A be there. And they have nothing for that. So you have to keep that in mind. Anyways, I bring that because of this. After that, we had no more studies because that was it. But who knows? That man, he got the truth. He understood, and he was almost there. I don't know whatever happened to him, but I'd like to hope and pray that one day he says, you know what, I remember what I was taught in the scriptures. I have to leave this. This is not the truth. I need to obey the gospel. And you know what? If he obeys the gospel, I may not ever find out about it because I don't know where he's at now. The point is it wrong to invite them into your house? No. When I invite the Jehovah's Witness into my house, it is not to help them in their work. Rather, it is to help them out of their work. I'm trying to get them to stop in a loving way. Here's another point. If you do not feel comfortable with them in your home, maybe you're still struggling with this, what John says, you know what? You don't have to do it at your house. You can say, hey, would you like to meet at a restaurant? Would you like to meet at the park, the library, church building? Or where would you like to do it? It doesn't have to be in the house. It could be a public place. Also, if you do not think you're ready to study with them, you can direct them to another member, the elders. I'll be willing to do it. Of course, they may not want to talk to me, but you could still point them my way. Just to let you know, the ones that are here, they know who I am. You point them to me. I'll be willing to talk with them if they would be willing to do so as well. What about the interpretation? The second one, it talks about, do not receive them into your house as being described as in your heart and mind. Well, certainly we are taught in other verses not to do such. Our mind should not accept false teachings. And so if we're looking at the mind as a house, we have other verses for that. Actually, John talks about that in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 1. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits. Test them to see if whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. And so that right there, no, we cannot allow it to come into our minds as we accept it. But the specific meaning here in 2 John 10 and 11 speaks about how false teachers are not to be helped in their work. We're not to support them. We're not to give them the false impression that we're in fellowship with them. And just to let you know, that's one question. And that's only like 3 verses. But we can see how one small letter, how deep it can go. And so if I were to quickly answer this, just to sum it up, yes, we can allow them in our house. We can have a study with them, but not for the purpose of trying to get it in our minds to just learn something new from them. We're not going to pay them for their services. We're not going to give them the false impression that we're brethren, that we're on the same page. But if something ever happens to them where they need help, I will help them as a good Christian should. But it is for a specific purpose. It's to show that I am Christ-like, and I'm going to help them just because they're a soul, and that's it. My reasoning would be different. So, hopefully that has helped. And so what? I said I had 18, I'm down to 17. But there's probably more back there. This is why I'm going to do it every Sunday evening so that I can make sure that your questions are answered. But I really appreciate this one. It is very good, especially in the morning as we're talking about such things. But if there's someone here who needs to get right with God, I know that this was not built for such a lesson as this, but hey, we're all here. And if you need prayers from all of us to go to God on your behalf, we're willing to do that. If you're ready to obey the gospel and obey the truth, as the truth is found in His Word, in John chapter 17, verse 17, then let us know as we stand and sing.